Hi everyone, and welcome to a new episode of Paratalk. And on this episode, I'm actually quite excited because I have someone that I've listened to their podcast, I think from front to back. I've listened to every episode, and every episode is as good as the previous episode I've kind of listened to. So this week I'm joined by Rob from Howhaunted. Hello there, Rob.
Hiya, good to be here.
Yes, finally I get you on an episode of Paratalk. I'm quite excited because I discovered your podcast. It must have been about a month ago, and I was totally hooked. So I think my first question is, where did it come from? Because it's quite new, isn't it?
But it came about because, I mean, if I go back to the very beginning, I mean, I've always had an interest in the paranormal. That interest's been huge over the last 20 years. But starting a podcast was never something that I'd considered doing. About 18 months ago, I started writing, completely off topic, for a retro Sega games magazine called Sega Mania. It's a physical magazine that we put together, and we started doing a podcast for that back in January. So it's a podcast about Sega games, but a couple of times I ended up talking about ghost stories, but purely because conversations went off on tangents, and people seemed to like them, and people would email in and say, "We want more ghost stories." So I thought, well, if people want it, why don't I just see if I can do it? What's the worst that can possibly happen? So I set about thinking, okay, well, there's an awful lot of paranormal podcasts out there. What would I want from a paranormal podcast? And what can I do that doesn't necessarily set me apart from the others, but would draw people to listen to me over the other podcasts that are out there? And I gave it a go. As I say, I maybe set 2 months aside to think about what I was going to do, plan out my episodes, and get a bank of about 5 started before I began, because I've been releasing one a week, and it's quite difficult to keep that up on top of real life stuff.
Having a show ready every week and published every week, it's a lot of work, especially if you have to work as well and you've got other things in your life going on. I have to say that your episodes, they're very informative. It's not just you relaying a story. You really do your research. I mean, how much time and effort does that take? I mean, it must be a lot.
Yeah, it is. I mean, some of the episodes I've done, I already know an awful lot about the location. So my first episode was Greyfriars Kirkyard. Then I did the Castle Keep in Newcastle. Yeah. And I was surprised. I don't think there's any other podcasts out there that have covered that location. Then I did Chillingham Castle up in Northumberland. And they're 3 locations that I knew an awful lot about to begin with. I've written about them. I've written about all 3 in books that I've done. So I had quite a wealth of research to fall back on to begin with. But what I do also try and do is, if I've investigated a location, then I'll include that report and talk about what happened when I was there. But if I haven't, I'll try and talk to somebody who has. And I'll always try and talk to staff at the place or visitors to the location to get first-hand experiences that you're not going to hear anywhere else. So a lot of time and effort does go into each episode. Dare I say, probably too much, but if a job's worth doing, it's worth doing well. And as you say, I don't really just want to regurgitate like reading through a website or reading through Wikipedia. I want to give people full rounded view of every location that I talk about. So I go into the detail of the history and make sure that background's there. Then I talk about the ghost stories and the hauntings of the location. And then, as I say, I'll always try and do something a little bit different, be it talking through an investigation I did or chatting to somebody who has been there when I haven't.
You mentioned authoring books and writing books. Where did that come from? I mean, because I know you've got an interest in the paranormal, but where did the original interest to put sort of ghost books together, where did that come from?
I mean, I put a website together originally back in the mid-2000s, maybe 2003, 2004. A few of my friends said, like the reports you put together on the back of the investigations that we've done are really good. Have you thought about writing a book? And I said, I can't write a book. What are you talking about? But then it was definitely a Sunday. One Sunday, there wasn't anything on TV. And I got thinking, you know what, why can't I write a book? So I sent an email purely by chance off to a few like historical publishers who specialize, previously released books about paranormal or about local history. Just said, look, I've got an idea for a book. Would you be interested? And then I got chatting to a lady called Matilda at the History Press, who said, well, all right, fill in this form, send us a couple of examples of the kind of things that you're thinking about from a chapter point of view, and let's have a conversation. And then maybe a month later, I'd signed a contract to write a book called Ghostly Northumberland. This was in 2007, and it was published in 2008. But before that first book was even published, she came back to me and said, do you want to do any more? So before my first book had even been published, I had a contract in place to write 3 more after that, about Tyne and Wear, County Durham, and Cumbria. But what I always wanted to do was, and those books focused on the history and the hauntings, a bit like the first part of my website, really, the history part of it.
Yeah.
But what I always wanted to do was write a book which almost followed me on an adventure. So I would put together a team and we'd go off and investigate some of the, in air quotes, most haunted. And I spoke to them about that after they'd done those initial 4 books, and they said, well, that isn't really something we'd be interested in doing. We're more interested in the history and the stories than the actual paranormal investigation. But I spoke to a different publisher called Amberley Publishing, and I had a conversation with them and said, look, what I'd love to do, and this is what really happened. I said, I'd love to write a book where I investigate 10 of the most haunted places in the UK.
Yeah.
I'll take a couple of weeks off work, and it'll be almost like a diary, like one after another. And they were interested in the concept, but they said from a marketing point of view, doing the whole of the UK would just be too expensive. So why didn't I pick a city? So I immediately said, well, you know what? I can't really choose between York and Edinburgh. And they said, well, do both. So I wrote Ghosts of York, where me and a small team of my friends, really, went and investigated 10 of the most haunted places in York. And I wrote that almost like a blog before blogs were a thing. And then I did Edinburgh the following year. That came out in 2014, I think, where I did 8 of the most haunted places in Edinburgh. So I did Mary King's Close twice, and I did the Edinburgh Vaults and the Edinburgh Dungeon and a whole host of other places. And we made a real adventure of it. So yeah, I mean, I've loved writing those books. Most of me royalties goes to charity, so it's not like it's something that I've done for a living or anything like that. It's more of a hobby.
It's a really good concept, that kind of format where you go out and you do an investigation and you kind of document it. Yeah. You're basically taking the reader on a journey of your investigations and whatever evidence you find. And one of my favourite authors, of course, Peter Underwood, the late, great Peter Underwood. One of my favourite books he wrote was Nights in Haunted Houses.
Okay.
That's still one of my favourite books, and very similar to what you're talking about. It's a collection of his well-known investigations, which he's put together, obviously, in a book, and, presents it as his thing. But yeah. I was going to ask you that, listening through your episodes, one of the main ones that really caught me was, and of course, a lot of people that listen to the Paratalk, they'll know that I love castles. I love castles and I love manor houses. And with Chillingham, of course, Chillingham Castle. Yeah. I mean, you actually did an investigation there.
I've done 2.
2? Mm-hmm. I mean, what was that like?
It's an incredible place. It really is. It's such a strange place. It's out in the middle of nowhere. It's so remote. As soon as you get through the gate into the castle grounds, your mobile phone signal's gone. The whole place has just got a real... I'll sum it up best by quoting one of my friends when we were there doing the investigation. I remember asking him, what do you think of the castle? And he said, even if you didn't believe in ghosts, you'd still say this place is haunted. Because it just looks... Yeah. It's the classic archetypal haunted castle. And I've done 2 investigations there. And the first investigation I did, which is the one that's documented on the podcast, I did release a Patreon episode which follows on from that episode. So that's episode 3 of the podcast, and I released a Patreon episode on the same day, which follows on from that, and it covers the investigation I did more recently in 2015, along with audio from the actual investigation. So rather than me just telling people what happened, they can hear it for themselves. But the first investigation I did there in 2005 probably left me with the most compelling evidence I've ever had for there being something going on, something that I can't explain to this day, even though it was, 18 years ago.
There's a lot of history there, though, isn't there?
Yeah, I mean, Chillingham Castle, it is such a dark place. I mean, during the time of the Anglo-Scottish Wars, when they were at each other's throats, it's so close to the border that there was the constant threat of attack from the Scots. And you can tell. I mean, even if you had to visit that place now, yeah. I mean, if you go into the oubliette, like the little dungeon, and look down the grate, and you can see the skeleton of the little girl staring back at you, and that's a real skeleton.
Yeah.
It's such a remarkable place. And it's very difficult to get to do an investigation there. When I did mine in 2015, they were only allowing 2 private investigations every year. The only other way you can do an investigation is by turning up and joining their investigation that they have organised throughout the year. And that's fairly easy to get onto, but you're with a whole group of people who you don't necessarily know. And if somebody says, I've seen something or I've just been touched, you're taking it on face value from somebody who you don't know. Whereas I much prefer to go in a small group of people who I know. So if somebody says something, I know whether I can believe that person wholeheartedly as to whether they genuinely have or they haven't. So it's an incredible place. It's an incredible place. Anybody who's not been, who can get to Northumberland, it's one of those places that photographs just don't do it justice. You have to see it with your own eyes.
I was going to ask you, as you've been there more than once, I've been to Dover Castle and other places, but with that place, there's a feeling when you go in there. Yeah. Maybe the history, maybe because of the age, as you say, that what's most probably gone on there. Yeah. But it's a kind of feeling when you go in there. You can kind of feel the history, can't you? You
definitely can, and I mean, it's one of these places where they haven't tried to make it look anything like other than what it is. I mean, if you go to Bamburgh Castle or Alnwick Castle, they're all lovely. This is a castle which has seen some horrible stuff, and you can tell it. You can, just by looking at it, just by walking around, you can sense the horrible atmosphere that it has. And I think going in, I've been there a lot of times. I first visited it in 2002, 20 years ago now. No exaggeration, it was probably the place that made me want to do paranormal investigations more than any other. It drew me in and it made me want to experience that location after dark. And it took us 3 years to make that happen. Yeah, it's a phenomenal place.
When you go on an investigation and you have a group of people and you're all like-minded, do you have a certain set of protocols in place where if someone experiences something or sees something or hears something, that you've got some way to document it where it can be catalogued in a way that that you can notate it and put it to say, well, that was this or that was that?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing I've started doing, I've been doing it for at least a decade now, is I'll always take 2 digital voice recorders with us, a minimum of 2.
Yeah.
So I've always got one with us. So if somebody was to say, I've just seen something or I've just heard something, I know exactly what they said because I've got it there documented, and I know exactly what time it was because I'll always make sure that I mention the time when somebody is to say that. And then as I say, I've generally got 2 or 3 voice recorders on the go at any one time. And the beauty of having those recordings is now I've got that audio, I'm turning it into podcast episodes, which I'm putting out on Patreon because, I mean, it's some of the stuff on there is gold dust. I've been listening back to an investigation I did at Edinburgh Vaults at 10 o'clock on a Saturday morning, almost exactly a decade ago. I've been listening back through that the last couple of days because I'm doing an episode on that. When we were in investigations, we'll always speak up, no matter how outlandish it is, what we think we've seen or what we've heard or what we felt. And it's always captured on the audio. And the first thing I do when I get back from an investigation, even if it's 5 o'clock in the morning, is I'll sit and write up my notes because I'm taking notes throughout the evening.
Edinburgh Vaults. Now that's a place where a lot of people have had experiences, and it's got that kind of whole paranormal thing about it. Have you ever experienced anything down there?
I've done an investigation there once for 2 hours on a Saturday morning because speaking to the people who run it, Mercat Tours, and the book I was writing was for charity, so they said, "Yeah, okay, we'll help you out. You can do it on a Saturday morning before we open to the public." And I mean, this is a bit of a spoiler for when episode 10 of my podcast comes out in a few weeks' time, but yeah, it was one of the most active investigations I've ever done. We had 2 hours. First hour went by and nothing happened at all. Second hour, we got out the spirit box, or Frank's box as we called them at the time, which is forever scanning through AM frequencies, scanning. And I wandered off and left the other, there was 4 of us, I left the other 3 to it, and I went off exploring. And when I came back, I heard one of the guys, Rich, say, "Oh, it said it again." And I said, "What did it say?" And he turned around and told us to F off. I said, "All right, well, what have I done?" And he said, "Oh, no, you don't understand. We've been having a conversation with somebody, and every question we ask, no matter what it is, that's what we're being told to do." And I looked at them thinking they were winding us up. So I said, "What is your name?" Clear as day, that's what we got back through the Frank's box. We asked some questions. We're like, how old are you? How did you die? And we're getting the same thing back. And eventually I said, "No, I'll tell you what, you F off. We're not going anywhere. You're not powerful enough to do anything. If you want us to leave, you're going to have to make us leave." And then my brother, who was with us, Tom, he said, "Did it just say witch?" And I said, "No, it said watch." And then we got no more communication at all through the Frank's box. But as soon as we moved into the next room, a stone whizzed past our heads and smashed off the wall at the far end of the room. And for the remainder of the time in there, we were getting stones thrown at us. There was one went past my head, and it was so close it almost hit me ear when it was going past. The whole time we were down there. And the problem was we were locked in. We couldn't even get out. The whole time we were down there after that, there was just stones flying around all over the place. It was crazy.
Wow,
it was crazy. And we were stood perfectly still because I was saying, "Well, look, there's loose stones on the ground. We'll always try and rationalize. We'll never jump to, it's a ghost. No matter what happens, it's always a case of, right, okay, well, what is it?" No idea what happened. It was incredible. As I say, that episode's coming out the week after me big Halloween spooktacular. But it's Edinburgh Vaults. I'll never forget that morning. As I say, it was almost exactly a decade ago I did it. It was the beginning of November 2012.
What was your first investigation where you went somewhere and you experienced something? I'm wondering, how did that make you feel when you actually experienced something and you just couldn't say, "Oh, well, this was that," or "This was that"?
My first ever investigation, if this hadn't happened, I wouldn't be here right now having this conversation with your good self, but my first ever investigation was Halloween 2002. So it was almost exactly 20 years ago, which has kind of given me age away a little bit. But it was purely by chance. It was one of those serendipitous moments. I was working at the Inland Revenue at the time, and I used to record a radio show because the job I did, you couldn't talk to the person sitting next to you, but you could listen to music or the radio, or whatever you wanted. Okay. What I used to do is there was a local radio show on called Night Owls, which was on Metro Radio, and the bloke who ran it, Alan Robson, did it for about 40 years. And he's a legend up here in the Northeast. And he used to do big ghost shows. And I used to record Night Owls onto some cassettes and listen to them on my Walkman in work, because I preferred to listen to people talking than listen to music. And when it was getting up to Halloween, he said, "For this year's Halloween show, what I want to do is I want anybody who wants to be involved in the big Halloween special to write a letter, a good old-fashioned letter on paper, send it to us and tell us why I should pick you. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick 10 people, and I'm going to send them to a location, and you're going to be our on-the-spot investigators." This was a huge show. Alan Robson's Night Owls was the most listened to talk show outside of London. And I wrote a letter in because I thought, I'd just graduated from university. I've got a few friends from university who I know would be up for it. This could be brilliant. This could be a real adventure.
Yeah.
Because I had been interested in the paranormal when I was young, but I hadn't done anything with that beyond reading about it and looking at stuff in the newspapers and having a keen interest. This was an opportunity, in my opinion, to actually do something. So I wrote a letter, and a few days later on the show, he said, "Oh, I've had 5,000 letters so far, and I'm going to pick the best 10. And I thought, well, I stand absolutely no chance. But I got home from work a few days later, and there was a letter waiting for us, and it had the Metro Radio postmark on it. And I thought, no, it can't be. And when I opened it, I can almost imagine what Charlie must have felt like when he opened that bar of chocolate and saw that golden ticket glinting in the wrapper, because it was a handwritten letter to me from Alan Robson, and I was one of the 10 who'd been picked. And he sent me off to a lake over towards Carlisle Way, in a place called Brampton, called Tork and Tarn. And the previous month, so September of 2002, it was in the local newspaper over there that 20 people or 25 people had seen the bloody apparition of a woman in broad daylight walk out of the lake and then disappear. And it made the local newspaper, so he wanted us to go and check it out. So I rounded up a few of my friends and we went and investigated it. Halloween 2002. I mean, to come back to your point about the first investigation where something happened, nothing really happened. But that really piqued my interest and made me want to do more. So the next investigation I did after that was at the Castle Keep in Newcastle in early 2003. And in that investigation, there were things that happened that I couldn't quite get my head around. I've mentioned this on the episode that I did about the Castle Keep, but we caught a scream before I even really knew what EVPs were. We recorded a scream that seemed to come from within the castle, although we couldn't be 100% sure. I saw things. It was a really, really interesting evening.
Was that the investigation with the curtains?
No, that was Chillingham Castle. That was 2005. I mean, that's happening with the curtains. That was probably the first investigation where something happened where, to this day, I can't explain it. I can't say, well, it might have been this or it might have been that. I don't know. I've no idea how that could have happened.
So just to recap, let the listeners know, because it is a really scary thing that you experienced.
So Chillingham Castle, this was December 2005, so it was a long time ago. And I remember it like it was only yesterday. It's so vivid. And I saw one of my friends in the pub a couple of weeks ago who was there that night. He was listening to the podcast and he says, oh, the thing about the curtain, I still remember that now. But what happened was we were in the chapel. There was a guy who worked at the castle called Bob. Who, when we initially got there, he said, oh, I talk to them, you know. I said, what do you mean? He said, oh, the ghosts. I can talk to them. So if you need something to happen, give me a shout and I'll come and see if I can make something happen for you. And I'm like, oh, okay, Bob. And then it got to 3 o'clock in the morning or something like that. It was early in the morning and nothing had happened. So I gave Bob a shout and said, look, Bob, we've been here for hours and it's really quiet. Let's see if you can help stir something up. And we got into the chapel and I was just about to say to Bob, look, we need to go. It's getting on at 4 o'clock in the morning. I've got to drive home.
Yeah.
And I hadn't even had a chance to speak. And Bob said, he said, hang on. He said, there's a spirit entered the room here called Eric. He's 12 or 13 years old. And the tragic thing about Eric is he doesn't realise he's dead. He's walking around the castle looking for his parents who were killed here. Eric likes to play tricks on people and let people know that he's around. And what he does is he moves this curtain. So in the chapel, if you're looking out towards to the left hand, if you're sitting in the chapel, looking out towards where the coffee shop is, you've got the great hall on your left hand side and you've got a big heavy curtain in front of you, which leads to a balcony. And then if you go down the steps to that balcony, you're in where the cafe is during the day. And he says, he moves this curtain. It's a really thick, heavy curtain. And no sooner had Bob said this, that the 5 of us who were there all saw this curtain move into the room. Not a breeze blowing it, but slowly, methodically, as if somebody was behind it, pushing it gradually until it was in the room with us, hanging down. But it was in the room so far that the bottom of the curtain was no longer touching the floor. And then it slowly went level again. And I could see behind the curtain, there was nobody there. Everybody who was in the castle was in that room with us and Bob. There was nobody else there. And then it did it again, slowly went level again, and then it did nothing else. And we sat and watched this curtain waiting for it to happen again, and it just hung perfectly still. And I can't explain it. To this day, I've no idea how that happened. I mean, when I was driving home, I was thinking maybe rigged something up so that Bob can press a button and it makes the curtain move or something like that. But I mean, I've never even heard of anybody else experiencing that.
When you experience something like that and you can actually see with your own eyes and your whole process, your whole mental process is like, what am I experiencing? Is this real? Am I imagining it? Is this a hallucination?
I know.
But what I was going to say was, you've been on enough investigations and you've had enough experience of things and you've written about a lot of these things. If I was to say to you, Rob, what do you think a ghost is? Where would you go with that?
It's a hell of a question. I suppose to strip it back to a little bit, I mean, the question, I guess, is, do I believe in ghosts?
Yeah.
And I don't really know how to answer that question. You're right. I've done a lot of investigations now over the last couple of decades, and I've seen things that I can't explain. A lot of things that I can't explain, and I've heard and felt a lot of things that I can't explain. But at the same time, if ghosts are real, I'm not sure I know what they are, because I buy into, say, the stone tape theory, that the reason that a lot of people might say that old buildings seem to be haunted is because of the iron or whatever's in the rock somehow recording the events of the past and replaying them. But at the same time, I've been on investigations, such as my second investigation at Chillingham Castle, where I would say, ask a question and ask for a knock in response and get a knock immediately back. And that can't be a replay, because that almost seems to be an intelligent response. So I don't know. I really don't know. I think the thing that fascinates me about ghosts is, I'm not convinced in my lifetime we'll ever know 100% if they do exist, because it's not black or white.
No,
it isn't black or white. If somebody was to say, does this exist or does that exist, it's fairly straightforward normally to say yes or no. But with the paranormal, it's a grey area. I believe there is something going on, but I don't think I'll ever truly understand what is going on in my lifetime. I had a conversation recently with somebody, I can't remember who it was, who said that they do think that in their lifetime, so in the next, say, 40, 50 years, this will be solved. Scientists or whoever will work out what's going on and why people experience the things that they experience. But I'm not sure that I believe that that's likely to happen. I don't know. It's fascinates us. It really, really does.
I think with old buildings, people say, well, why don't we ever see the ghost of a caveman?
Yeah, or a dinosaur.
Or a dinosaur.
Yeah.
Maybe they're, maybe when we pass over, that we are maybe like little batteries, and over time we run down. And when you see an apparition of something that does the same thing over and over all the time, that over the years, over the decades, it runs down until there's a point where you don't see it anymore. You just hear it, and it's just it's a set of footsteps instead of a actual person walking around. As I say, it's just speculation, isn't it? It's just, and everyone's got an opinion.
Yeah, everyone's
got an idea.
Everyone does.
So moving on a little bit, I'm keen to, as I say, I'm a little bit addicted to your episodes, because you do put a lot of effort into them. What direction are you going to go in now? I mean, how are you going to move forward with your podcast? Have you got any sort of idea?
It's still, I mean, I appreciate your kind words, and I've had, when I started doing this, I didn't expect anybody to listen, but I've had some really nice emails from people saying that they enjoy it, and I've had some people sign up to me Patreon, even though I'm still really new to it, and there isn't an awful lot benefit to signing up to Patreon because there's only one special episode out. But in terms of where I'm going to take it, it's a really, really good question, and I think at the moment I've come up with a format that I quite like and people seem to enjoy, so I'm going to stick with that. I am making tweaks as I go. But there are things that I'd love to do. I've been working on my big Halloween special, which I've put way too much time into. I really, really have. And a bit of an exclusive, because Halloween's not all that far away. But my Halloween special is going to be a ghost walk of York. So rather than focus on one location, I'm going to give a little bit, there's a little bit of background about Halloween and the setting the scene. Then I talk a little bit about York, what makes York so special, the fact that it's got Roman, Saxon, Norman, Viking heritage. Then it's onto an actual audio ghost walk, and I've planned it out as a logical route that somebody, if they wanted to, could walk while listening to the podcast. And
that's pretty cool.
It's in a sensible order, and they're all within walking distance of one another. So I've put a lot of time into that, and I'd love to do more stuff like that. What I'd also love to do would be to do some on the spot episodes where, say, I go to somewhere like Chillingham Castle and record an episode while I'm there. And I'd love to do something like that. I'd love to do maybe 1 or 2 episodes at some point in time where I'm doing that and it's just me.
How would you feel about going to somewhere that was like, super haunted or had lots of things that had happened, and it was just you and a recorder and maybe a video camera, and you were locked in for the night, and that was it? How would that make you feel? Would that excite you, or would that terrify you?
Both, in equal measure. I'd do it. I'd definitely do it. Because I know that if I didn't do it, I'd regret it.
Yeah.
But I'd love to do that. When I did my book about York, what I wanted my big finale to be was to do something similar to that. So I don't know if you're, and this is kind of spoiling a little bit of what's on my Halloween episode for anybody who does listen, but I don't know if you're familiar with St. Saviour's Church in York.
I know of it, but I'm not familiar with all of its history, no.
There's a brilliant ghost story from St. Saviour's Church. It's now, it's not been used as a church since the 50s. It's now an archaeological museum called Dig, owned by the same people who do Jorvik Viking Centre. But there's a ghost story, may be true, may not be true, from the early 50s. So back in the old days, there was a Viking skinned alive by some Christians, and apparently the ghost stories now is that there's a vengeful Viking spirit who haunts this building. One of the ghost stories there is that there was a ghost hunter back in the very early 50s who wanted to do a ghost hunt there because he'd been told about this Viking. He wanted to go in and take a camera with him, take a notepad with him, and see if he could find the Viking. And he said to the vicar, Can I do a ghost hunt here? And the vicar said, well, no, of course you can't. It's a church. He said, me parishioners wouldn't be happy. No, of course you can't. But this guy was stubborn, and he was going along to church services and asking the vicar on every occasion he could. And eventually the vicar said, look, I'll let you do it, but I'm going to go home to my vicarage. I'll lock you in for the evening, and I'll come back and let you out in the morning. And the guy said, perfect, I'd love to do that. The next morning when the vicar went along, he opened the door and immediately knew something was the matter because the guy's camera was in the doorway, smashed to pieces. And he went off around the church looking for this guy and couldn't find him. And in the highest reaches of the church, he spotted him sitting on a beam, looking at him. And the vicar was like, oh, thank God. I didn't know where you were. This guy said nothing. And when he got near him, he knew why. This guy was dead. The vicar moved to another parish. And when this guy's cause of death came back, he had been frightened to death.
Wow.
Brilliant story. So when I did my York book, I wanted my grand finale to be me spending the night in that building on my own, locked in with no way out until the next morning. But sadly, they wouldn't let us do it because it's, as I say, it's a museum now, and based on the stuff that's in there, I just couldn't make it work. I mean, they were very nice, and we did have a conversation about it, but I just couldn't make it work. But I'd love to do it. I mean, the Ancient Ram Inn's got a hell of a reputation, and I spoke to Emma from the Weird Wiltshire website when I did my Ancient Ram Inn episode, and she was lovely. And I said to her at that point in time, I'd spend the night in the Ancient Ram Inn on my own if the opportunity presented itself.
I was going to ask you your thoughts on the Ram Inn. I mean, it's got a lot. It's very popular at the moment. Everyone's going there at the moment. Everyone's doing videos. There's my whole YouTube subscription is basically the Ram Inn. Everybody's going there. But what's your thoughts on it?
I'll be honest. I've never been. I should have been, but I've never been. It's just been one of those places I've never been able to make it work. Like if I've been down in the south, it's no longer an inn. It's not as though you can just walk in and have a look around. You've got to book onto a tour or book onto a ghost hunt. Yeah. So it is somewhere that's on my bucket list, and it's somewhere
on your to-do list.
Somewhere I'd definitely love to go. I mean, I'll be honest. I am naturally skeptical, which is, as I say, I mean, I think you need to be, because otherwise you go into a ghost hunt or go into a haunted location and everything's a ghost. Everything has a paranormal explanation. And I'm extra skeptical of anywhere that solely makes its living on being a haunted X, Y, or Z. So the Ancient Ram has a real reputation. And as you say, it's very much in vogue at the moment. If I look on my Twitter feed, I've seen people post some things saying, out of these locations, which one would you like to go and visit the most? And the Ancient Ram Inn always wins. That's why I spoke to Emma when I did that episode, because I thought, you know what, I need somebody who's actually been there to give to give a fair, unbiased reflection about what happened. Do you think it's haunted? But I mean, I'd love to go. I'd love to go and see for myself. I think without having been there, it's very difficult for me to say. But it sounds, as you say, as though it's become a bit of a mecca for anybody who's into the paranormal to head to the Ancient Ram. It's just a shame it's the opposite end of the country to me.
It is very sort of popular at the moment, and I must say that I've read and seen things of people that have actually had things happen to them. There's some people that say, "Well, I was assaulted, I was pushed, I was punched," and other people have not actually had anything physical happen to them, but they've had stuff that has emotionally happened to them. They've come away and they've felt very depressed or very upset. I'm coming to the end of this episode. What I was going to ask you was, from your end of investigations, have you ever gone anywhere and not necessarily had an experience, but had more of an emotional experience where you've come away and felt a little bit depressed or a little bit, sad or whatever, rather than being affected sort of internally rather than externally?
That's a good question. Off the top of my head, I would say probably Mary King's Close. I've done Mary King's Close twice when I was investigating Edinburgh. And I think the second time, because the first time we did it, we went along with a group called Mysteria Paranormal, and Ian Lawman, who's on the TV, he was there. He was the psychic for the night, and it was a huge group of people. But when we did it the second time, I got us in with just us. It's an incredibly difficult thing to do, but there was 4 of us in all of Mary King's Close for ourselves. And it really did strike an emotional chord with me when I left, but I'm not going to say it was anything paranormal. I think it was more about just thinking about how bleak things must have been for anybody who lived there and some of the stories that you heard about the place. I can't say that I've been anywhere off. I mean, I'm as soon as we stop talking about this, I'm probably going to think of somewhere, but I can't think of anywhere where I've inexplicably came over with some kind of emotion of feeling sad or feeling melancholy. And that's probably down to the fact that I'm maybe doing myself a disservice by knowing the ins and outs of everywhere before I go in.
Sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes to sort of front load yourself to a certain degree, where you go into a place and it's not a question of you expect something to happen. Is you kind of what might happen. It's still going to be quite scary if a cavalier walks out of the wall and you witness that.
Yeah.
I just think that there are people that go out there and they go to places and they might not experience something visual or physical, but they have that kind of emotional response to it. And I think maybe we've all got that. Maybe that's all of it in us. Everyone's got that. It's just that some people are a little bit more sensitive than others. And I think my last question for this episode is, what's your thoughts and your feelings on psychics and mediums? Have you ever worked with any when you've done investigations?
When I go along on investigations, it's me and my small team. And when I say team, it's usually me brother and 2 friends who I've known for 20 odd years. I don't tend to look to get a medium involved. And as I say, I mean, that investigation I did in 2005 at Chillingham, when Bob came along and the curtain occurred, that was pure happenstance about the fact that when I got there, he was our staff for the night, and he happened to say, I speak to ghosts if you want me to do something. But I have been on investigations where there has been mediums, and I mean, I'll be completely honest, I don't buy into 99.9% of them. Mediums are probably unfairly judged on the fact that there are a lot that aren't for real. Unless a medium can say to me, there's a ghost here and the ghost is going to do this, and then it happens, how do I know what they're saying is for real? It's a very difficult thing to prove. What I will say, though, is my latest episode that's just come out about the Wheatsheaf pub in Bolden up in the northeast, which is a place that's kind of fallen off the radar, but it was big news back in 2004 when a whole load of stuff kicked off there. And it ended up becoming voted the most haunted pub in the UK in that year. It became the subject of a Discovery Channel documentary that was watched by something like 20 million people. I interviewed the medium at the centre of those events, a lovely lady by the name of Suzanne Gill. And some of the stuff that she made happen at that pub couldn't possibly have happened unless she genuinely was tapped into something. So I don't know if you know the story. As I say, it was big news 18 years ago, but it was probably bigger news in the Northeast because that's where it was happening. And in this particular pub, she went along to a charity psychic night. It's in Bolden, which is in Tyne-and-Wear. She went along to this charity psychic night, and during this charity psychic night, a young girl made herself known to her and said, "Oh, can you help us? I need your help." And at the end of the night, she went and spoke to staff and said, "Look, this girl's talking to us and saying that she needs our help." And then when she dug a little deeper, there was like a malevolent male spirit at the pub called Joseph, and it seemed, had murdered this young girl. And she eventually said to the members of staff, "If you knock down that wall, you'll find evidence that this girl was here. That's not something you can fake unless you go back in time 200 years to when the pub was built and put something in the wall for it to be discovered later on." And I don't know why they did it, because, I mean, you're taking the word of a psychic who you don't know.
Yeah.
But they knocked down that wall and they found evidence of the remains of a young girl behind that wall. And I don't know how you can fake that. There was a whole host of other stuff. So she tried to, she said there was 37 spirits at the pub who were all crying out for help. Basically what happened was, it seemed there was somebody who was connected to the pub back in the old days who was luring young children there from the village, murdering them and disposing of their bodies. And this young girl, Jessica, was one of them. And she was trying to help this girl, Jessica. And on the recording that was being made at the time, there was a man's voice saying, "I'm going to kill you. I'm coming for you, Suzanne," stuff like that. There was a whole load of stuff that happened. There was possessions. I was lucky enough to interview her, and it was the first interview she's done since this night 18 years ago. We talked for so long that I've had to put it across 2 episodes, episode 7 and episode 8, the Wheat Sheaf part 1 and part 2. Some of the stuff she told me has not been written anywhere before, and I didn't know. It was a crazy, crazy story, but the fact that she was able to tell me, she was able to tell the people at the pub, "This is what you're going to find if you knock that wall down," and they knocked the wall down and found it. How can that be faked? To come back to to answer your question, I think there's something to it, but without knowing somebody, like, unless I knew a medium really well and I knew they had a track record, it's a really, really tricky one. It is a really tricky one. I mean, as I say, I did an investigation where Ian Lawman was there, who's on the TV right now on Help My House is Haunted or whatever it's called, and he's really famous. And obviously, like Derek Akora, you had on Most Haunted, who the late Derek Akora, who was revealed to be the stuff that he was doing on Most Haunted wasn't for real. Yeah, I mean, it's a really, really difficult one. I think anybody who says I'm a medium or I'm a psychic is immediately off to a bad start, purely because of the fact that there's a reputation that a lot of the people who have this gift or this talent are making it up.
I do think that there is some form of mediumship, psychic medium, whatever. But I think that the people that do have what I call a real gift, they don't talk about it. They maybe just they don't talk about it. They just, like, they know what they've got and they don't need to talk about it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of people out there that do talk about it, and maybe they're the ones that make it hard. It's like anything. It's like, even like ghost hunting. There are you've got the serious and you've got the other side, and it's the yin and yang. I think you need a little bit of both to make it, to keep it sort of the ball rolling. But anyway, so on that note, I think we've come to the end of this episode. Totally fascinating, and I don't want you giving away all of your spoilers for your up and coming episodes, because I'm really looking forward to hearing them. And I'm going to highly recommend anyone listening to this episode, if you go to all the links are going to be with this podcast, but you should go and listen to Rob's episodes, because they are really, really, really well put together. And as I say, that some of the original recordings that you've done from your investigations you've included, it gives it another dimension. You've kind of added to it. You've sort of given an episode, but you've given that little bit of a peek into an investigation as well. So anyway, Rob, it just leaves me to thank you for coming on this episode. Have you got any final words before we before we're on our way?
No, I really, really appreciate being invited on. As I say, my podcast's really new, and to be given the opportunity to come along and have a conversation about it. I mean, my favourite topic of conversation, is it's been a real delight. So no, I truly appreciate it. And what I will say is, if anybody does come along and listen to me podcast, please just drop us an email or get in touch with us on Twitter and let us know what you think. I'd love to hear from anybody, because it's really nice to think that, and I'm sure you have the same feeling, that there's somebody out there somewhere listening to something that you've put together. You know, like I'll be sitting at work and I'm thinking, you know what, there might be somebody out walking the dog who's listening to me talking about ghosts, and it's nice. It's really nice when people get in touch to tell you that they like what you're doing. So no, I thank you so much for giving us the opportunity to have a chat with you. It's been great.
That's all right, Rob. I mean, I'd like to, a little bit later on, I'd like to get you back when you've done maybe a few other investigations of that, and we can sort of have a catch up. Got a small group of people that I normally have on and sort of catch up with them now and again. But anyway, so all the links are in the podcast, and obviously paratalkpodcast.com for all of other episodes as well. But thanks for listening, everyone. Until next time, see you soon.